There is a silent waiting that inhabits the soul of many, a waiting that doesn't scream but weighs heavily, that doesn't reveal itself in words but insinuates itself in every gesture. You may not notice it, but there is a part of you that lives in the shadow of this invisible hope, quietly believing that someone will come to rescue what was lost. But what if I told you that this waiting is for someone who will never come? Carl Jung spoke of the unconscious as a mirror of what we refuse to see in ourselves. And there is a deep truth, often ignored, behind the feeling that something or someone from outside will finally fill this emptiness. It's not about emotional neediness. It's about a search for meaning, for self-love, for validation that at some point in childhood was left hanging. There is something that almost no one notices about this. It's as if life silently taught us that love must come from the outside, that emotional healing depends on the presence of another. And while we continue to wait, we fail to see that this other perhaps never even existed, except within ourselves. In this video, you will be guided through reflections that challenge common logic. We won't bring ready-made answers, but we will open doors. Doors to places within you that you may have never looked. Places where self-love is not just a concept, but a real, living possibility, waiting for you. And when you get there, you may discover that the answer was always closer than you imagined. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung. Sometimes it's not the silence of the other that hurts, but the echo of what was never said to us. There is a waiting that settles in without us noticing. Not through words, but through glances, gestures, through a subtle confirmation that we exist, that we are enough. This waiting for external validation starts early. And the most unsettling part, it becomes part of our inner functioning, as if we needed someone else's permission to be who we are. But there is one detail that changes everything. This waiting doesn't begin in adulthood. It is formed in the subtle folds of childhood. We grow up believing we are only worthy when others recognize us, as if self-love depended on a reflection. The absence of a "you did well" or "I'm proud of you" turns into an invisible hole we try to fill with performance, success, relationships, everything except ourselves. And what few understand is that this constant search for external approval is like running toward a mirror expecting a hug. It exhausts us, because every smile earned, every applause received, lasts only a blink, and right after, the doubt returns. Am I enough now? This repetition is cruel. And the cruelest part is that often we don't even realize we are trapped in it. This brings us to something even deeper. What we call love is often just a disguised plea for validation. We seek in the other what we should have learned to recognize in ourselves. It's not emotional dependence. It's the reflection of a childhood where love was conditional, where acceptance came with a price. And this price today translates into relationships where we give everything, secretly hoping for just one thing: to be seen. And then, everything makes sense. The root of this waiting does not lie in the people who reject us now, but in the versions of ourselves that were never welcomed. The child who waited for praise, the teenager who shaped themselves to please, the adult who repeats patterns, hoping for different results. Emotional healing begins when we understand that no one can give us what we ourselves have denied our own hearts. In the end, the answer was always there, in the simple gestures of self-acceptance, in the moment we choose to say enough to this dependence disguised as love. When we stop chasing approval and begin to build our own validation, stone by stone, word by word, this is the beginning of true self-love, the kind that needs no one else's approval but our own. But are we ready to accept this? Because recognizing this truth is like waking up from a comfortable dream. It's painful, but it's liberating. Seeing that our wait for validation is actually a plea to rescue ourselves, and the only person capable of answering that plea is us. And this is where the journey transforms. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Carl Jung. In the depths of the silence we carry, there is a small, delicate, almost imperceptible voice. It is the voice of the child we once were. The one who, amid forced smiles and unfulfilled promises, learned to wait for the touch that never came, for the presence that disappeared, for the words that were never spoken. And so they grew up believing that love is something to be earned, not something that simply is. But there is one detail that changes everything. That child does not disappear. She lives within us, acting behind our decisions, our fears, our relationships. She doesn't ask for much. She doesn't demand luxury or grandeur. She just wants to be seen. She wants to be heard. She wants someone to say, "I see you," and you don't need to do anything to deserve that. But that rarely happens, because most of the time, we don't even see her anymore. What few understand is that childhood pain doesn't scream. It whispers through behaviour, the constant search for validation, the anxiety that arises in the silence of someone we love, the fear of being abandoned. All of these are manifestations of an unmet longing. The longing for a love that should have been unconditional, but instead came with demands, expectations, and sometimes absence. This leads us to something even deeper. That inner child doesn't want us to love her the right way. She wants us to stop ignoring her pain, to acknowledge her existence, to say, "I know what you went through and I'm here now." Only then can emotional healing begin, because self-love is born from the reunion with that forgotten part of ourselves, the one who learned to stay silent in order to be accepted. And then everything makes sense. Our relationship patterns, our fears, our attachments, all of them carry the signature of that child, the one who felt inadequate, disposable, invisible, the one who believed she had to be perfect to be loved. And the saddest part is that we keep trying to be perfect, even as adults, hoping for a kind of love that may never come the way we dreamed it would. In the end, the answer was always there, in listening, in acceptance, in the symbolic embrace we can give ourselves when we decide to stop expecting from others what was once denied to us. It's not about blaming the past, but about freeing ourselves from it, understanding that the pain we feel today often belongs to a time that has already passed, but still pulses inside us. But are we ready to accept this? Can we look within and recognize that wounded child without judging her, without trying to silence her? Because until we do that, we'll keep projecting that pain into all our relationships, hoping someone will fill what only we can heal. And in that moment, everything truly changes. The greatest tragedy of the soul is to live attached to something it believes is love, but in truth is emotional need. Carl Jung. When we are not seen as children, we learn to live as if love is scarce. And that scarcity shapes not just our desires, but also our relationships. The emotional void is not just any hole. It has shape, colour, smell. It knows exactly where it hurts. It's the absence of a hug that never came, the lack of words that could have saved us, but didn't. And when ignored, that void turns into a magnet that attracts everything that looks like love, but deep down is only a reflection of silent emotional dependency. But there is one detail that changes everything. This dependency doesn't show itself in grand gestures. It lives in the subtext, in the fear of losing someone and losing ourselves with them, in the need to erase ourselves just to keep the other person close, in the silent panic that arises when a message takes too long to be answered. They are small daily pains that form an invisible cycle where external validation becomes fuel for existence. What few understand is that loving too much is sometimes just an elegant way of saying we don't know how to live without being loved. And not out of guilt, but out of repetition. Because when the love that shaped us was conditional, we learnt we had to earn it, to please, to give in, everything, except simply to be. And so we grow up confused, mistaking intensity for presence, jealousy for care, attachment for affection. This leads us to something even deeper. Self-love becomes a distant idea, as if it were a luxury reserved for those who are already whole. But in truth, it is the only way to break the cycle, because as long as we are filling the void with someone else, we will always be on the verge of losing everything. Emotional dependency is not love. It is a way of emotionally surviving when we have not yet learned to be with ourselves. And then, everything makes sense. That relationship that seemed perfect but left you exhausted, that friend who always made you feel in debt, that constant feeling that something is missing, even when everything seems fine. All of these are signs of an emotional void begging to be heard, an old hole but still alive crying out for attention. In the end, the answer was always there, not in the other, but in the moment we stopped looking outside for what was denied within. True love begins when you become the safe place you always searched for in others, when you learn to hold yourself, even without an audience, when you choose to stay with yourself, even on the days when everything in you wants to run away. But are we ready to accept that? Because breaking free from emotional dependency requires courage. Courage to feel the emptiness without trying to cover it up with distractions. Courage to listen to the inner child without trying to silence her. Courage to choose every day to be your own comfort, your own company, your own route. And it is in that silence that we begin to truly find ourselves. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Carl Jung. Somewhere along the path, between the pain of waiting and the exhaustion of seeking, something shifts. Not explosively, but like someone slowly waking from a deep sleep. An almost imperceptible moment in which the soul, for the first time, whispers, "What if I don't need to search anymore?" That is the beginning of the meeting with self-love. A reunion with parts of ourselves that were left behind. Forgotten fragments among the attempts to please, to be accepted, to be enough. But there is one detail that changes everything. Loving yourself is not an act of selfishness, but of liberation. It's not about closing off from the world, but about opening up a space within that has always existed and has never been inhabited. Self-love is not an abstract idea. It is concrete. It is the moment you say no to what hurts you, even if it hurts. It is the moment you choose yourself, even if the other doesn't understand. What few understand is that this encounter is not immediate. It doesn't come with formulas or ready-made phrases. It comes with silence, with presence, with the willingness to be with yourself without judgment. It happens when you start to look at yourself with the eyes you always wished someone else had. When you embrace your shadows, your wounded inner child, your deepest pain, without trying to change anything. This leads us to something even deeper. There is a peace that only arises when you stop asking for permission to exist. When you understand that your essence doesn't need validation to be real, that the love you were searching for was, in fact, a memory of yourself, distorted by the broken mirrors of childhood but still alive, pulsing, waiting. Emotional healing begins in this moment of silent reconnection. And then, everything makes sense. The loneliness that once hurt begins to transform into solitude. The frantic search gives way to a dance with time. You learn to listen to yourself, to care for yourself, to choose yourself. And in that process, you discover something surprising. The love that comes from within demands nothing. It simply is. It sustains. It transforms. It heals. In the end, the answer was always there. In the way you treat yourself when no one is watching. In the thoughts you nurture about yourself. In the gentle gesture of holding yourself when you make a mistake. True love is not grand, it's everyday. It's the daily practice of being present for yourself, even on the days when everything seems to fall apart. But are we ready to accept that? Because the encounter with your own love demands that you stop being a victim of the past. It demands that you stop blaming, stop waiting, stop begging. And that sometimes is more frightening than continuing to suffer. But it is also the only path to the emotional freedom we so deeply desire. And it is at that point that the waiting finally begins to dissolve. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung. There comes a moment when the waiting exhausts us. There's no more strength to chase after validation, no more breath to feed hopes that never come true. But what seems like an ending is actually a birth. The end of waiting marks the beginning of something new, something quieter, more authentic, more internal. It is at this point that we begin to heal, not because everything around us has changed, but because we have changed the way we look within. But there is one detail that changes everything. Healing doesn't happen in a day. It doesn't come with a magical revelation or with ready-made phrases. It comes slowly. In the act of forgiving yourself, of holding yourself, of stopping the abandonment of self. It comes when you finally understand that you no longer need to be saved. Because you were never lost, only asleep, hidden beneath layers of waiting, of pain, of untold stories about who you had to be to deserve love. What few understand is that to heal is not to erase the past. It is to make peace with it. It is to look at that wounded, needy inner child and say, I see you now, and I'm staying. It is to take the place of the one who cares, who stays, who validates. Because self-love is this, becoming the adult you always needed. And in that process, emotional healing stops being a goal and becomes a daily practice. This leads us to something even deeper. True freedom lies in no longer needing someone else's love to exist. It lies in being able to receive it, yes, but not depending on it to feel whole. It lies in loving without losing yourself, in giving without disappearing, in accepting that you are enough, even when the world insists otherwise. And that kind of love is priceless. And then everything makes sense. The waiting ends when you realise it was never about the other. It was about you, about your presence, about your gaze, about your courage to stay with yourself. And from that point on, everything changes. Because what once was absence becomes presence. What once was pain becomes strength. What once was emptiness becomes sacred space to be filled with what is real. In the end, the answer was always there. In the end, the answer was always there. Not in the childhood that passed, nor in the one who left, but in the now. In this very moment when you choose to love yourself, not as an isolated gesture, but as a state of being. Because self-love is a return to what is essential, true, untouchable, a return to what has always been yours, but you had forgotten. But are we ready to accept that? Because accepting this truth means saying goodbye to the old story. It means stopping the waiting and starting to live. It means trading the pain of absence for loving presence. And that, though challenging, is the first step toward a life that no longer depends on what's outside, to fully bloom from within. And so, healing begins. Throughout life, we were taught to wait for recognition, for love, for validation, to wait for the other to notice, for the world to respond, for the past to correct itself. But the great revelation is not outside. It's in the moment something inside us breaks. And at the same time, something awakens. The truth is uncomfortable, but it is in that discomfort that freedom lives. And then everything makes sense. You're waiting for someone to do what only you can do, waiting for love to heal you, when in truth the wound will only close when you decide to care for it with your own hands, waiting for someone else to see your pain, when it's you who needs to finally look at it. The waiting ends when you realize no one is coming, and that is liberating. In the end, the answer was always there. In the self-love you thought you had to earn, but only needed to recognize. In the silence that seemed empty, but was always an invitation to inner listening. In the childhood that felt so far away, but now pulses in every emotional decision you make. Everything always pointed inward. Only no one taught us how to look. But are we ready to accept that? Because to accept is to be reborn. It's to stop living in the shadow of a past that's already over. It's to choose day by day to honour your own existence with presence, with compassion, with truth. And this awakening, even if subtle, transforms. Not because it changes the world around you, but because it changes the way you take your place in it. Now everything lies before you, and the next step is yours. You are waiting for someone to do what only you can do, and maybe for the first time you felt the weight, and at the same time the lightness of that truth. Because waiting is safe, waiting is familiar, but living takes courage to return inward, to embrace your own childhood, to heal your own emptiness, to find your own love. And now that you've seen all this more clearly, you can't unsee it. The world may remain the same, but something in you has already begun to change. You no longer search with the same eyes, no longer feel with the same longings. And that is the beginning of a new life. A life where self-love is no longer a distant idea, but a daily choice. A life where emotional healing no longer depends on others, but on your willingness to meet yourself. Now is the time to take the first step. Start applying these ideas today, and then tell me in the comments how the experience was for you. Tell me what part of this journey resonated with you the most. In which part did you see yourself, recognize yourself, feel moved? Share your experience. It might be the key for someone who is also in silence, waiting to be seen. And if you feel that this journey isn't over yet, I recommend watching the video right above. It might be the next step your heart is ready to take. See you in the next video.